You know, I'm always blessed by our worship at Atholton, but I have to tell you the truth. Somehow, I feel just a little bit more blessed when our kids are singing for us and playing the band, and just when they're participating, I feel just a little bit more blessing in that day. So thank you so much for all of your hard work, young men and young women. It's a strange title, Cradle Crusher. You know, when we think about the Nativity, it's always tidy. The focal point is Jesus. If we would pan out just a little bit in the stable, we'll see Jesus and Mary and Joseph. It's a beautiful scene. We pan out a little bit more. We can see the whole stable, the setting of the story. Pan out a little bit more, and we see the shepherds. And even though most of the pictures of the Nativity like this show the wise men, you do know the wise men weren't really there at the same time the shepherds were there. They were there many months later. But we still, to make the picture complete, we still put them in. If you pan out a little bit more, we'll see the angels and the stars above, the angels singing about the birth of the newborn baby. It's an idyllic scene. It's beautiful. The angels are there to announce the birth of Jesus. But have you ever thought that the angels are there for another reason? Because if you pan out even further, you'll see that surrounding this beautiful scene is Satan and his evil angels. They were not far away, because they were also welcoming the newborn baby, but in a different way, because they wanted to destroy him. There's an interesting quotation from the book Desire of Ages in which Ellen White talks about this. If you haven't read these chapters about the birth of Jesus recently, I encourage you to do so over the holiday season. She writes this: "Such was the Savior's reception when he came to the earth. There seemed to be no place of rest or safety for the infant Redeemer. God could not trust his beloved Son with men, even while carrying forward his work for their salvation. He commissioned angels to attend Jesus and protect him till he should accomplish his mission on earth and die by the hands of those whom he had come to save." So we look at the bigger picture, and we see Satan and his angels surrounding the cradle. This sermon title, Cradle Crusher, was inspired by a song by Michael Card. Some of you have heard of the singer-songwriter Michael Card. And one of his very early songs was a song named "The Spirit of the Age." It was in his earlier years. It may not be a song style that many of you would appreciate. Now you're all going to go look it up on YouTube, aren't you? The Spirit of the Age. But in this song, he says these words, speaking of Satan: "If he could crush the cradle, then that would stop the cross. He knew that once the light was born, his every hope was lost. And so he did everything he could. The conflict that had started in heaven many years before, the great controversy between Christ and Satan, had now opened upon another front, this one the earthly front. On hostile ground, Satan with his believed power and all of his minions, and a helpless baby in a cradle. It hardly seemed a fair fight, but that's why God kept those angels up there. They protected the baby all the days of his life. And it's interesting that in the cradle was the cross. Now, these scenes are sketched out prophetically in the book of Revelation. Usually, if I would preach a Christmas sermon, most of you wouldn't think of me to turn to the book of Revelation. But there's this small prophetic style message in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, that tells the nativity story in its briefest of symbols. It's prophetic in nature, and most of us think of Revelation 12 as being prophetic. But in actual fact, only part of Revelation 12 is prophetic. Verses 1 through 5, John is writing in a prophetic form, but he's actually writing things that have already happened because it tells about the birth of Jesus. And by the time John is writing around 90 A.D., that's already happened. But he is telling the whole prophecy, and after verse 5, it begins to get into prophetic material. And so we have this passage, Revelation 12, 1 and 2. It says, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with a sun, with a moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth." Here is this prophetic symbol. A woman clothed with a sun, the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars, not thorns, and she has a baby in her womb. Now, a woman is oftentimes a symbol of a church or a movement or a group of people in Scripture. It can be a woman like this, who is pure and holy, but Revelation also has another symbol of a woman, an adulterous woman dressed in red. And so the woman is a symbol of either God's people who are true to him or God's people who are adulterous and false to him. And here, obviously, this is a very pure, loyal woman. Now, we have this symbology illustrated other places in Scripture. In 2 Corinthians 11:2, Paul says this. He says, "For I have divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ." So the church is being likened to a pure woman. We have the same thing in Ephesians 5:25 through 27. It says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish." So here again we have the symbol of the woman, a pure woman, being a symbol of the bride of Christ, the church. And so here in Revelation, we pick up that symbolism, and we have this woman, a symbol of the true followers of Christ, not simply of the church. I think sometimes we've made too much of the church and not enough of the followers. You know, the church is its followers. And so when we read about the church, we have to look at what's behind the church, and it's God's true people. And so here's a symbol of God's true people, and she is getting ready to bear the child. Now, at this point in time, you have to be able to see that these symbols mean one thing, but they also include other things. Because who was pregnant with a child? It's Mary. And so obviously this symbol of it's a pure woman, a symbol of God's true followers, because when you get back later on in the passage, you'll be able to see that it couldn't simply be Mary. I'll point it out to you when we get there. And so while this is a symbol of God's true people, there's also this aspect of Mary, because she is the one who will bear Jesus. It continues on. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. I am getting a wrestling on my phone, and it's bothering me. Whether it bothers you or not, I don't care. But it bothers me. That wasn't very nice, was it? So here we have the second symbol, this great red dragon. Now notice it has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns or diadems on his head. Now if you've read the book of Daniel, you understand that this beast is a composite of many beasts in the book of Daniel. It's kind of a mishmash of many of the symbolic things that we find in the book of Daniel. Who is this dragon? There is no reason to try to figure out who he is, because in Revelation 12:9 it tells us exactly who he is. It says, "And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." So there's no question who this is. It is Satan. We also read already that his tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. But then it continues on, "And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it." So this dragon has a very specific agenda. He wants to kill the Christ child. Now there's no question that in symbol, this is the Christ child. It continues on. It says, she gave birth to a male child, with one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. This is a very brief story of the life of Jesus in just a few words. But there's no question, this is the nativity scene. And as Jesus is being born, Satan is surrounding it, because if he could crush the cradle, he could stop the cross. And he knew that if Jesus was born, his every hope was lost. And so Jesus was dogged by Satan all the days of his life. We know this is Jesus because of some parallels in other passages. You know, the book of Revelation borrows from many books of the Bible. In the book of Psalms, Psalm 2 is a messianic psalm, and prophesying of the coming Messiah, it says, "You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." So it's predicting, it's prophesying that the coming of Jesus, the coming of the Messiah, he would rule with a rod of iron. It also gives us the same picture later on in the book of Revelation, Revelation 19, in telling us about Jesus when he's riding on the white horse. It says, "From his mouth comes a sharp sword, with which he will smite down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron." And so this symbol of the child who will rule with a rod of iron is Jesus himself. So how does the dragon seek to accomplish his goal? He doesn't do it himself, but he seeks earthly dupes, earthly henchmen to do his job. One of those was Herod, the king Herod the Great. Herod fulfills this prophecy of Revelation 12, when the dragon is trying to destroy the baby, the Jesus baby. Now, how does he fulfill it? Well, you remember the wise men. The wise men come to Jerusalem and say, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" To which Herod replies, he doesn't reply out loud so anybody can hear him, but he replies, "Time out, I am the King of the Jews." So anyone who is born King of the Jews is a threat to Herod. And so I love what Herod does. He says, "Go find the baby so I can come and worship. Kill him. That's what he wanted. So I can kill him. And so the wise men go and they find Jesus. You know the story. But being warned in a dream, they do not go back to Herod and tell him where the baby is. And so Herod takes things into his own hands. Matthew 2:13 tells us the pre-story. It says, when they, the wise men, had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And that is exactly what happened. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they are no more. So the great red dragon tries to destroy Satan. It tries to destroy Jesus, but Satan cannot do it. Who does he use? He uses Herod. I wondered, now this may be totally different than what you've ever read in Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, but I've wondered if that's not the real reason why this great red dragon has so many heads and crowns. Because he's using kings to do his bidding. And maybe those crowns and those heads are symbolic of the earthly henchmen that he's trying to use to accomplish his task. Uriah Smith won't buy this, but he's dead. And so the dragon, using Herod, tries to kill Jesus. But God protects his son Jesus. Notice it says she gave birth to a male child who was one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. All the days of his life, Jesus fought Satan. You know, this is such a beautiful little scene. But the great controversy between Christ and Satan was real, and it waged every day of Jesus' earthly life. Now, it's kind of a phrase when it says he was caught up, because that little phrase encompasses 3.5 years. You know, God protected him and he was caught up. And don't forget, during that time, something major happened. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So it takes it for granted that you know this part of it. And what comes next will follow it. It continues on, and this is where I don't have time to chase this today in verse 6. But it says, and the woman, that's God's true people, symbolized by Mary there, but God's true people, the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, this becomes where, when John is writing it, this leaves history and becomes prophetic. Because the woman was God's true people, and Satan turned his wrath on them because Jesus had escaped him. And when Jesus escaped Satan, he knew that his every hope was lost. But he still turned his wrath on God's people. And so it says, she fled into the wilderness to a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Sometime in a sermon, I'll talk about those 1,260 days. I don't have enough time in this sermon to share that theology with you, but you know that in the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, a day in prophecy equals a year of actual time. And so this is foretelling something that will happen over 1,260 years. This is why Mary can't simply be the main symbol of the woman in Revelation 12, because this is a movement, or it's God's people, which lasts a long period of time. And so we see the woman, but we also see the other symbolism in Mary. So I wish I had time to go into that, but we'll do that another day. But then it continues on. Revelation 12, 7 through 9. This is a familiar verse to you, I'll bet, for many of you. It says, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Most of you have read this text, and most of you have heard it said that this tells about the fall of Satan. And it does, but I'm going to share with you a different understanding that probably most of you have never heard. I came to this because of a Bible study with someone who came to a prophecy series that I did. You know, there's no question that sometime in the ancient primordial past, Satan rebelled in heaven. Revelation 12:4 says when he rebelled, he used his tail to take down a third of the angels, a third of the stars in heaven. And we interpret that to mean that a third of the angels defected when Satan defected. But I'm not sure that this passage is talking about that event. Usually, this is the passage we go to. Now, there's other passages that talk about the fall of Satan, about the war in heaven. Here's Revelation 12:4. Well, we already saw that a third of the angels are taken down. Here's Isaiah 14:12. This is in a prophecy about Satan. And it says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. How you are cut down to the ground and laid the nations low." Notice it says that the day star, that was Lucifer, the one who was in heaven. That was his name. And it says, "You are fallen from heaven." At some point in time, Satan was cast out of heaven. We have this parallel prophecy in Ezekiel 28 talking about Satan. It's in the symbolism of a king of Tyre. But there's no question that it's talking about Satan. It says, "You are an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of the fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created, till unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire." The Bible tells us that Satan once lived in heaven, and he was cast out because of his rebellion, because of his defection. There's no question about that. And yet, is that what Revelation 12, 7 through 9 is talking about? At some time in the ancient past, before the creation of the world, if you read the book Patriarchs and Prophets and Early Writings by Ellen White, she will tell you that part of the reason of the rebellion of Satan, of Lucifer at that point in time, was over arguments that he had with God about the creation of this world. And so this rebellion happened before the creation of this world. And at some point in time, in the primordial past, before the creation of this world, Satan was cast out of heaven. And yet it seems that, from Scripture, it seems that he had some access to heaven. The book of Job. "Now there came a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." It seems as though Satan has access to God, access to heaven. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro upon the earth and from walking up and down on it. Now, you know the story that continues. God says, what do you think about my guy Job? He's a great man. And then the conversation continues. But what I want you to see is Satan seems to have had access to heaven, had access to go where God was meeting with the sons of God. Another example of this. Another example is Zechariah 3, 1 through 3. It says, then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire? Now Joshua was standing before the angel clothed with filthy garments. Here again is a scene, and Satan is always the accuser. When people stand before God, Satan is accusing them. He does the same thing to you and me. You know, Satan says to God, how could you possibly love this guy, Frank Zollman? Do you know what he's done? I'm glad you don't. He's the accuser of the brethren. And he always appears there to accuse God's people, Job, Joshua. He seems before the cross to have had access to God and to heaven. But something happened at the cross. Something happened at the cross. Jesus won. He knew that once the light was born, his every hope was lost. And at the cross, it was decided. At the cross, Jesus said it. It is finished. And so, this will be new to some of you. But I think that at the cross, because Satan and his angels were forever defeated, they were then forever cast out of heaven. And so, as I look at Revelation 12, this prophecy, it looks to me like it's a chronological passage. And so once it says Jesus was taken up to heaven, it says there was war in heaven. And Satan and his angels fought against Michael and his angels. Remember, Michael is a symbol of Jesus there. This is the great controversy between Christ and Satan, or between God and Satan. And I think that after the cross, there was war in heaven again for the final time. And for the final time, Satan and his angels were cast out of heaven, never to be able to go again. Never again, because they were at the cross totally and completely defeated. That's why Revelation 12, 10 and 11 is so exciting. After it talks about war in heaven, and Michael fights against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, and there's no more place found for them, and they're cast out of heaven. Revelation 12, 10 through 11. We don't often read this in conjunction with verse 9, verses 7 through 9. But I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now is the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. The accuser of the brethren and the cistern has been cast down. Good news. It's good news. The accuser has been cast down, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they have loved not their own lives, even unto death. This is a victory hymn. Salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser has been cast down. Let me suggest to you, this could never have been said until the cross happened. This could not have been said before creation started, because mankind had not defected to Satan yet. This final victory hymn could not have been said back then. That's why I think when Jesus went back up to heaven, he cleaned house. Finally, there was this war in heaven, and Satan, who had some access to heaven, can no longer go there. And victory. And it says, and they have conquered him. Who's they? Who's they? That's us. That's us. That's the ones who are being accused by Satan. And when Satan accuses us now, Jesus says, my blood, my blood, my blood, my blood. He can't accuse us anymore because he has been cast down. And this could only have been said in the history of salvation. It could only be said after the cross. Now I know there are some ominous passages in this chapter also. It says, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Is that you? No, it's not you. It's not me. But woe to you, O earth and sea. That's us who live on this earth. That's us. Woe to you, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. He knows he's a defeated person. He's a defeated Satan right now. He knows it. And this sounds very ominous. Adventists love to quote this one. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. We believe this talks about Seventh-day Adventists, those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. We believe that refers to us. So we love to quote this passage. King James says, and the devil was wroth with the woman. Wroth means really angry. And he went to make war against the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. We as Adventists love this passage. And it's a good passage. But this passage can lead to paranoia. Woe to those who dwell upon the earth, because the Satan has come, and his wrath is great. And people can get really, really worried about that. Paranoia, scared. But do you not remember what we just read in verses 10 and 11? The dragon is defeated. The foot of Jesus is on the throat of the dragon. He has been defeated forever. Never forget it. I saw his t-shirt one time. I loved it. I wish now I would have bought it, but by now it would be so worn out I couldn't wear it. But it said this: the next time Satan reminds you of your past, you remind him of his future. Next time Satan reminds you of all the bad things you've done, he tries to tear you down, you remind him of his future, because Jesus has already won, and the victory is ours. Anyone who stands with Jesus can claim the victory. Isn't that good news? Anyone who stands with Jesus can claim the victory. That's you. That's me. And it all started in that nativity 2,000 years ago, when Jesus won through the power of God and will win again. I want to sing this song as we close. Good Christians, now rejoice in heart and soul and voice. Let's stand together, please, and sing.